Hi there, welcome to the third edition of Thrive the Livecast. We're really happy to receive you at home. Tonight we'll be discussing commoning as a way to reconceptualize the economy. Kees, why is commoning an essential part of new economies?
Well, I think, in my humble opinion, it's the fundamental for a new economy. I think we saved the best for last. No, I really think that commoning and commons are really crucial and fundamentally to heal the divide between capital and labor at this moment. And I think there's a lot of there's a lot of sense in fundamentally recreate the dynamics. And I think Commons is basically showing the way to do it. And if I might paraphrase Martha Beck, sociologist Martha Beck, she introduces the phenomenon of a dissolution instead of a revolution. So whereas revolution is an attempt to overthrow power structures, dissolution means that you basically dissolve power structures, and I think Commons is all about that. So, viva la dissolution.
Okay, thanks for that. We have a wonderful group of guests tonight with whom we'll be discussing both theory and practice of commoning. We'll introduce our guests in a little bit. Kees, you and me, we wrote a book, Fundamentals for a New Economy, and we asked David Bollier to co-create a chapter about commoning with us. Could you tell us a little bit more about why we chose David?
Well, because we're fans.
Yes. Yes. It's
Sorry,
true,
David, we're fans.
It's true.
No, but David's books are a wonderful example of practice-based theory.
Yeah.
So it's all about practice, it's about doing, it's about becoming a commoner and learning the dynamics behind it. And I think that is a wonderful way to approach science. So I'm an absolute fan of his work.
Yeah.
And I know you too.
Yes, I am. Yes, I am. Let me properly introduce you, David. David, you're the director of Reinventing the Commons program at the Schumacher Center for New Economics, and you're the co-author of Free, Fair and Alive, which is her latest book, but you've written 12 other books too. And I believe we can also call you a commons activist.
Yep.
Yeah, you have a podcast on commoning, which is very much worth listening to. And I believe you're taking us through the theory, but also, well, your vision of commoning for the next 10 minutes. Am I right?
Yes. It will be a very abbreviated version, but I want to hit some of the high points of what we need to be thinking about as we try to reconceptualize the economy.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Well, I'll give you the floor then, David.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you for this opportunity to share my thoughts. And I want to congratulate Kees and Shinta for a fantastic job of pulling together the Thrive anthology, which brings together so many thoughtful, provocative essays in such a timely, necessary way. And of course, it's great to be among good friends here at PACWIS again. I'm sorry I can't be there in person. Where to begin? There's so much to say. Let me try to give the 7 to 10 minute version of how the commons can help us reconceptualize the social relationships that are otherwise known as the economy and build a different regime of value. And let me just start by saying that we need to, as it's been alluded to, we need to approach the commons as commoning, the verb, not the noun, because that really holds the key to understanding how commons actually work. They're social processes primarily and not a resource alone. You know, economists and politicians are generally regard the commons as unowned, potentially shareable resources like outer space or oceans or the atmosphere or the internet, and they presume that shared wealth will be destroyed in a tragedy of the commons unless there's private property or government stepping in to manage the resource. But the presumption is that only the market, whoops, trying to move my, I'm sorry, I have to screen share. I forgot to screen share my slides, so I need to quickly put that up. There we go. The presumption is that the market and the state are the only significant sources of production and governance, but the state and market regularly misconstrue and ignore the commons, which is why so many people see it as archaic or irrelevant today. But at the same time, we're starting to see the deficiencies and limits of the market state system itself during the pandemic, not to mention through a lot of global crises. And we're starting to see the limits of an economics that by definition regards externalities as something that can be ignored, a framework of thought that has given us a collapsing climate and so many other problems. But on a finite planet, there are no externalities. So this is a rather deep-rooted system of thought we need to revisit and change. I mean, if the history of the common shows anything, it's that common in itself can be a highly stable and generative form of governance. It's value creating in its own right. It just embodies a different worldview and mindset than the one described and prescribed by standard economics. To be clear, a commoning is a set of activities and activities and governance and rulemaking and self-monitoring and traditions and rituals and so on, through which one makes a commons. A commons has to be created and maintained. Now, when my colleague Silke Helfrich and I were researching our book, Free, Fair, and Alive, The Insurgent Power of the Commons, we slowly came to realize that the standard economic vocabulary and discourse just couldn't accurately describe what was going on in a commons. And we realized that commons are actually living social systems and not primarily about resource management or better property regimes, although of course those things matter. But commons are about learning how people come together and stay together to act as stewards of shared wealth, whether it's biowealth or software code or urban spaces or many other types of systems. And we also realize that commoning occurs outside of the neoclassical capitalist mindset. It enacts a different set of human attitudes and behaviors than the ideal of Homo economicus, the rational, utility maximizing materialist that we all know and hate in economics. But to see how human beings think and act and learn and know within a commons, you need to try to achieve what Silke Helfrich and I called an onto shift or an ontological shift away from standard economics. You have to see that the world is more about relationships than individuals and objects. Or I love the quote from the eco-philosopher Thomas Berry, the universe is a communion of subjects, not a collection of objects. So that requires a really shift of perspective, because standard economics is a mindset that separates so many things. It separates provisioning and governance, assigning the first to the market and the second to the state. And economics also separates humanity from nature, which is supposedly different and other. And it focuses mostly on individuals and ignores collectives and systems for the most part. So there's a lot of artificial separations and dichotomies going on that are dysfunctional in our world today. This is the point that I wanted to make in our book, Free, Fair, and Alive, that social life, provisioning, and peer governance are all integrated within the commons. You can talk about them separately, but they're really connected together. But the point is that these are an alternative system of value that, hold on a second, I've lost my place in my notes here. It's a way of creating value that the standard economic story simply doesn't tell. But this involves some tensions with the state, because the politics of state power and representative democracy have their own priorities and dynamics. Among these are a commitment to so-called self-made individualism, expansive property rights, and constant economic growth. And the state also likes to consolidate and regularize life into kind of a universal grid, whereas commoners pay much more attention to local context and particulars and tradition and all sorts of irregularities that the state tries to regularize. So seen from this perspective, commons are not just about small-scale projects on the peripheries of the market-state system. They're really a germinal vision for reinventing some fundamental social premises of economics, governance, politics, organizational life, infrastructure, and state power itself. Now, most notably, as the slide suggests, the commons represents a different theory of value. It's not a tragedy or a system of transactions among people for money. It's a generativity of living systems, and it's about durable social and ecological relationships. So I like to think that to talk about the commons is to enter into, in our early stages, a post-capitalist narrative that invites us to enact a different ethics and politics of social, ecological, and cultural well-being. The Community Economics Research Network and feminist economics often use this iceberg image to illustrate the enormous amount of non-market value that's created outside of the formal economy of money transactions. And as you can see, most of life itself exists outside of markets, although businesses are constantly trying to dream up ways to monetize life from, big tech and social behaviors through algorithms, or big pharma and ag biotech through genes and using patents to control genes, or copyright law being used to control snippets of sound and imagery, and so on. But given the state's alliances with capital, deep alliances, commoners generally prefer not to look to the state or state authorities or bureaucracies as guarantors or administrators of their interests. They generally prefer a more direct sovereignty and control over the spheres of life that matter to them through commoning. And rather than rely on politics or bureaucracy or markets, commoners prefer bottom-up acts of participation, mutual aid and support, peer negotiation, communication, experimentation, the whole range of human activities that are helpful to controlling the commons, managing it. And in this sense, I think commoning represents a newly rediscovered but ancient form of social power. The paradigm has far-reaching civic and political implications because acts of commoning bring about new social practices and civic identities, and they catalyze new political and economic possibilities. Because by decommodifying our social relationships and making them less dependent on markets, commoners are reducing their vulnerability to a global market system that is often predatory, sometimes corrupt, and sometimes ineffectual. So commoners are finding value and stability and security through the relationality they knit with each other, with ecosystems, with their ancestors, and prospectively with future generations. So, when you start to see value in this way as relational and participatory in something that can't be objectified or traded or colonized by capital, it really opens up some new possibilities of hope. And we can see that commoners can start to control some of the value that they create rather than being colonized by outside forces. So this is a very different theory of value than one sees through the market price system, which is so intent on capital accumulation as the only way to meet people's needs. Commoners believe that it's entirely feasible to meet needs without this imperative because it's already happening in dozens of realms right now. You can see it in commons-based land systems and agriculture and fisheries and forests and digital spaces and urban spaces and all sorts of social communities. Now, although it's still emerging, the commons verse represents an independent parallel social economy with a very different logic and ethos than the market state system. Its primary goal is not to seize state power through revolutions or elections, valuable as that might be. It's to develop stable, independent spaces for participation, collective control, and belonging over things that matter to people. And this constitutes really, well, Kees said the dissolution aspect of commons, revolutionary, dissolutionary aspect of the commons, it's transformative in any case. The point is, you can create your own system within the dominant system right now without permission and protect it, albeit you might need some creative legal and economic hacks to do so. Now, that interest in the commons, now that the interest in the commons is growing, the next frontier is arguably about how state power can be more supportive of the commons. Now, while there are some inherent tensions here, I do think that commons public partnerships are an attractive new option, especially at the municipal level. But that's a larger, more complicated conversation that I don't think we can get into at this moment in this short presentation, but maybe in the Q&A. Let me just close here by calling attention to my new book, The Commoner's Catalog for Changemaking, Tools for the Transition Ahead. It's inspired by the Whole Earth Catalog of the 1970s and by the Dutch version of this a few years ago. I'm not sure if I'll pronounce it correctly, De Heel de Staat, Heel de Aard, which was the whole Commons catalog. And the point of my catalog is to show that the breadth and liveliness of Commons projects and movements around the world is really quite stunning, and how these various models, there's dozens of them, can inspire many new forms of post-growth, climate-friendly initiatives. And we need all the inspiration we can get right now. The book will be published in the US in January and in UK and Europe in February, but it's available for free online in the meantime under a Creative Commons license at commonerscatalog.org. And so with that, I thank you so much for being able to make this short presentation, and I look forward to the conversation.
We're only a small crowd here, David, but we're all clapping.
Trying to compensate for the hundreds of viewers that are at home. Yeah. Thank you so much, David, for your short talk on the Commons. And for those who are in need for a small definition, so we really are talking about self-organizing to address our needs outside market state system, right? Yeah. And you just briefly mentioned we can start doing that right now within the system. We might need a creative, legal, economic hack here and there. Could you elaborate a little bit more about what hacks are already known of?
Well, so much of the legal system is oriented towards promoting market activity and protecting businesses. So it privileges capital, private property, market transactions, which means it sometimes doesn't make sense, or it works at cross purposes, or even criminalizes sharing and commenting, like seed sharing or peer-to-peer file sharing. Yeah. And so frequently you need to create legal hacks for your commons to work. And that was one of the great contributions, both in free and open source software, a license that essentially allowed, in advance, allowed anybody to use the software code however they wanted, to modify it, to improve it, to share it, without permission, without payment, all in advance. And this was like a really breakthrough legal innovation that allowed sharing to proceed, and people could be assured that no one would take that code private, that their contributions to the commons would not be essentially appropriated. Mm-hmm. And then the Creative Commons licenses later did the same thing for text and images and music and so forth, yeah, allowing works to be presumptively shareable, which is something the copyright law simply doesn't make any provisions for. There's no way to make something legally guaranteed to be shareable. And you need that legal guarantee for institutions in particular, like academia, to invest in shareable content. So these are two examples of the kinds of legal hacks that need to be done sometimes. Yeah. It's being emulated now in the seed world where people, so much seed is being taken private as proprietary patented seed that people are trying to devise hacks to protect seed as well.
Yeah, thank you, David. Just one more question for clarification purposes. To mutually benefit from shared wealth, you mentioned steward ownership. There's much to do about steward ownership these days. Could you just briefly tell us what that means?
Well, maybe you're using it as a term of art that I'm unfamiliar with, because I regard most commons as being stewarding the resource, meaning they're not treating it as a commodity to earn the most revenue or profit. In fact, they don't even necessarily regard it as a resource. They regard it as I like to call it, as care wealth, something that their identity and culture and traditions teach them to care for, and therefore to apply a price to it is kind of a category mistake, or at least a violation of what the shared wealth is all about. So stewardship is about protecting the long-term viability and health of whatever your care wealth is, whether it's code or a forest or a fishery, and that's an important concept in the commons.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I believe you call it stewarding as a collective rather than steward ownership, right? Yeah, but we do, in the end, mean the same, I think.
Although ownership has a little bit of a twist of the whole history of ownership means I can do whatever I damn well please with what I own. Yeah. Whereas in a commons, it's not quite so absolute.
Yeah. Well, it's good. Thanks for mentioning that, because that's... so the new language is, in that sense, very important to take with us. Yeah, yeah.
A major challenge that we have actually is emancipating ourselves from these hidden premises in our vocabularies, particularly in economics discourse, because there's all sorts of hidden tripwires and premises that we need to question and need to work our way out of if we're going to see the world in a different way. And that was a major challenge I had with Silke Helfrich in writing Free, Fair, and Alive, to realize that, no, I can't call that a resource, because that implies a whole range of things that a commons doesn't agree with.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, this basically also shows that system change really demands story change. Yeah. We have, it starts with the narrative. It starts with, words are crucially important.
Yes, it's not just a matter of messaging or PR. It's a matter of the philosophical depth of what you're talking about. Yeah. And it has profound implications about how you orient yourself, what you strive for, what your strategies are, how the law should be constructed, and so forth.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I believe that's why David speaks of an onto shift.
Yes.
Yeah. Love that word, by the way.
Yeah.
David, so please remain with us for the next 1.5 hours, and please participate in the dialogue. And for the people at home, you're also invited, of course, to send your questions in. It would be great to hear from you. David just showed us an iceberg.
Yes.
Illustration, which is very interesting. And I was thinking, speaking of non-market living systems, we have 2 guests that we can share the table with today that will speak a lot about the practices of commoning. Yes. We have Tjeerd Hakau, who is who is the founder of Space and Matter. You're an architect, I believe.
By education, definitely.
Yeah. By education, and a commoner by heart.
Yes.
And then we have Gerard Roemers. You are the co-founder of De Warren, a housing commoning initiative. Welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Tjeerd, could I ask you first, what does commoning mean to you, and how do you put it in practice?
Well, I think what I would like to say is a little bit how we started and why we are actually doing this. Yeah. Because when we started our office 12 years ago, me and 2 partners, we won a competition And it was 2009. We won a competition. We thought, okay, we start an architecture office. But it was the worst time for a regular architecture office to start because financial crisis hit and there were very little or no commissions because all the commercial parties, they just stopped developing. But what happened then is that Amsterdam kind of opened up their land to people because the commercial parties didn't want to build, so people started to build. And we had the fortune to get in touch with a lady, Marianne de Blok, who had this idea that she wanted to live on water in a super sustainable way. And we said, well, we have nothing to do, we have a little competition money, so we can maybe help you. And we did that, and she was so inspired by this dream, and she also managed to engage a lot of other friends of hers. And that started Schoonschip, a collective that eventually realized their own floating sustainable neighborhood. And well, here you see it. And what struck us most is the ambition that this group of people had. They wanted to be the most sustainable neighborhood in the world, but they said in Europe, and then floating neighborhood in Europe. And eventually, after 9 years of hard work, they I think managed to do that. So they invented this and realized a smart grid, which they can share their energy from the solar panels together. They even have a floating biorefinery in which they transform their bio waste from their waste from their toilet into biogas that heats up the boats again. And all these things were kind of invented and initiated by themselves. So by a community, there were no commercial parties involved. And we had the fortune to help them with creating the sustainable, the urban plan, and Metabolic, Gerard's office, helped also with the sustainable ideas behind Schoonschip. And what we were doing is, why is this not happening all over the Netherlands, right? So why are we only building top-down homes? And if we work for commercial parties, we have to optimize the Excel sheet, right? We have to optimize the spreadsheets to make the most profit. And here it was not about profit. It was how can we optimize our impact and within our own budget. So then we thought, well, this is the way we should build our country, right? This is the way we should build our cities. And that is what we have been kind of trying the most in the past 12 years, to help people and to help initiatives that come up with these ideas to actually realize their dreams.
Because it always starts with the people themselves.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's always bottom-up.
Bottom up, I think, is the best way, because they have passion to do what they do and to realize it. So we think that this should be the way that we develop our cities, and the key issue is, how do you scale this up? Right? How do you make this big? Because we have this big housing issue that we need to build 1 million homes in the coming, I don't know how many years, and how are we going to do that?
Yesterday, we needed to build them yesterday, right?
Exactly. We're too late already.
So what's the inherent intent of this community of people that want to live this way?
I think a lot of people just want to live that way, but they just don't know that it's possible to live that way. Because if you tell them, everyone gets excited. There was a waiting list for this project of more than 1,000 people, you know. But a lot of people just don't know. If you want to find a house, you go to Funda, to a platform where you buy single-family homes or an apartment.
You take the highway to the market.
Exactly, that's the only way. So what we've been developing for the past 2 years now is a platform that actually leads people to these kind of collectives, what we call crowd building, which is still in the startup phase, so we're working on it. But what we want to do is actually to let people group around these dreams that they have. A bit like Kickstarter, but then with housing ideas and collective housing ideas. And
fantastic.
Well, we start online and then see how they grow, and help them with a network of other architects and process guides to
make it happen.
To make it happen.
Yeah. You mentioned that there were no commercial parties involved in the
commercial developers. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, exactly. Because my question would be about how then did you get the investment And were there any banks involved?
There were banks involved, definitely. Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. So, but for the whole planning phase, so to make a design and to get your permit, that they had to do by themselves. So they needed savings. And that's a big issue. Also, if you want to scale up these things, and want to give this kind of living possibilities to the people that need it, the lower and middle income. You need to make something happening for them. You need to get a kind of fund where they can borrow the money, of course, pay for the architects, or do it in another way. But and eventually, when the bank wants to finance the actual house or the development, they can reimburse the fund. So that is what we're also trying to do with crowd building. So we try to bring people together. We try to show the land opportunities that there are. So we also try to convince the provinces and the municipalities to offer their land to people, not necessarily to market parties. And then on the platform, they can find professionals that help them and also find finance for their projects. And how we can realize that finance, I'm not sure yet. We have our government, but decentralized finance would be an option. Crowdfunding would be an option.
Maybe David has an idea how to hack our way out of this system.
Hack the finance.
Well, actually, that's an important frontier because I'm in the process of researching a report on what I call relationalized finance, which gets out of debt and equity as the chief sources to community-embedded pools of money that can be paid forward. And it's an independent source that therefore doesn't require the growth or extraction that conventional finance usually entails.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Like community land trusts or CSA farms.
Yeah, it's already out there.
Yeah. Well, we're also working with so that is the crowd building. That's our own initiative to try to make it bigger than it is now. Wonderful. But we're also involved in the community land trust, the Belmer, so to also start a housing cooperative there. I really believe in those kind of systems. Also in my own neighborhood, we have a very nice neighborhood, still industrial area, but it will grow into this super nice circular area in Amsterdam. But we have a fear as neighbors that all these the nice functions, like the kind of grassroots things that happen there that make it nice to live in now, will disappear when the big parties come in and the price of a square meter is rising. Yeah. Exactly. So we say, well, why don't we together as neighbors, try to get these plinth spaces for ourselves as a community, so we can rent them out to the functions or the entrepreneurs that we really like in this area. And we don't want to have the highest price. We don't care too much. We want the highest fun factor in our neighborhood.
Yeah. This is actually what David just said. It is a form of power. Social
Definitely,
power. It's about power to the people. It's about reclaiming a sense of autonomy.
Yeah, but it's not, and it's power, but it's just power because we have the right intentions. We don't want to make money. We don't want to make profit. We just want to have live in a cool way together. Or
just power. I like that.
Just
power.
Gerard.
Yeah.
You're a co-founder of the Warren.
Yes.
A housing project. Could you tell us a little bit more about the Warren?
Yeah, sure, I can. So it's a couple of things. Maybe as an object, it's 36 apartments for social and middle income rents. It's a hybrid from wood and concrete. It's a sustainable building in that sense, as you can see here. Yeah. This is the render, but it's being built at the moment. Mm-hmm. It's also very much a community, so it's a group of people with mostly my friends, actually. So it's a really personal project, and we are trying to create a parallel system in the sense of a parallel place to live, partially also outside of this capitalist dynamic of the economy. And then it's a new ownership model, and it's a new finance model, and that's also what really makes it a cooperative and what makes it a good example of commoning, I think. This is a project in which rather than having a commercial developer on board, we as future inhabitants are taking up the role of developer. So we are collecting the land, collecting the money, creating the design, doing the project management, basically picking up all those processes that normally you would hire someone in or pay someone for via just buying a building. And we're taking care of those ourselves so that we can customize it also to the needs of the particular group that is going to live there. And the interesting thing is I think that none of us will own any apartments in this building, so that's also a difference with some other bottom-up projects, but in fact it will be owned by a cooperative, by an association, legally speaking, that is also prohibited in its statute and even in the land lease to ever sell it again. So I think that's a really interesting final step where you can say we're literally siphoning 36 apartments, so let's say roughly 7.5 million in capital, and in the future some 500,000 of cash flow per year out of the capitalist market. We're building a place to live, not a speculation object, but really a house, and it is legally arranged in a way that it will stay a place to live and a community, rather than being sold as, you know, the value increases, which is in Amsterdam not a very unlikely scenario.
No.
Yeah. So it's
really like
truly
a system in a system.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yes, exactly. So it touches upon a lot of the different elements of David's presentation and what Geert is saying here as well in terms of a bottom-up process. And that's really interesting.
Very hopeful, eh?
It's very hopeful.
Yeah.
Are you all still friends?
Yes, yeah.
How do you manage to stay friends?
Actually, I'm in the board with my partner, and we're also still
partners.
having a happy relationship, so that's really good. Yeah, we were already very good friends, and a group that was really used to, in our free time, also just do weird things and see if that would work out. And this is definitely the weirdest so far, but it's really nice. It's a good way of trying something out and learning a lot of new skills as well. Yeah.
Hey, and what are the reactions from the, for instance, the municipality? How do they react on this one?
Well, they really initiated this, so that's really nice. The municipality has created several plots of land, 3 initially and 14 at the moment in total, for cooperative development. And because Amsterdam is in the unique position where it owns roughly 80% of the land, rather than having sold that to commercial parties or social housing corporations, it can actually grant development rights with pretty far-reaching prerequisites. And one of the prerequisites for these plots is that you develop it under a common model and that you create a common ownership model as well. So they've really set this up. They've also supported us quite a bit. And they're actually a keen listener also to what we bump into. So just as an example, one of the main hurdles for us was finance at the start. Not the bit that you can get from the bank, which is, let's say, 80%, but the other 20%. And we were able to do that with a lot of running and jumping and thinking about innovative ideas and sources for money, but that was very draining. So when we told them, okay, this is maybe doable for us barely, but the next group might not make that, they set up a fund, a revolving fund, loaning out this 20%. So the gap basically
it's quite courageous
to the commons.
Well.
Yeah, it's really good. So it's 50 million in a big jar, and it's up for grabs for the next cooperatives if they provide a feasible business case and a good plan, of course. But that makes a world of difference.
Wow.
Yeah.
I can imagine that this is really inspiring for some of the listeners. They might want to start a similar project. What would you?
I hope so.
Yeah. What would be your main tip or trick?
I think there's a lot online. So there's a lot of communities online. Geert just mentioned their website, of course. There's also a co-op link and a bunch of other resources. So I think that really works.
Yeah.
Then that's just like where to get the knowledge. I would say the other big tip is really find a group of people that you love to work with, because it's super fun, but it's also very intense, and it will suck up some evenings and some weekends, depending on how well it goes.
It's hard work.
So you should really do it with people that inspire you. And I think you should also do it not just because you want a place to live with those people. That can be the direct driver, but it's also really a new type of system that you set up, a new little piece of society that you're building.
You're writing history.
And if that's not like that's for me the main driver. I always said if I only live there half a year and then I'm done with it, that's also fine, because then it's still there and you still have this new pillar in the housing market, which is really, really nice. Yeah.
Really inspiring.
And get an economist and a legal, someone with a legal background.
But I think that is really cool that they actually managed to do it. But that's also the issue, you know, because you are all very bright people, and it's for the less bright people maybe a very high threshold to start these kind of things. Yeah. So and that is why we with the crowd building platform try to make it very, very low threshold and to really be open to everyone. And because that's now the big issue. Like if you go to these platforms about cooperatives, it's a lot of text and reading, and a lot of people don't have time for that. You know, they don't have time to really dive into it. So you have to take them by the hand and help them through the process.
David, how is this situation in Amsterdam, is this like really innovative from an international perspective?
I think it's very cutting edge. I mean, I'm kind of astonished as an American at how many and how far these projects have gone. I think the political culture is more supportive at the municipal level. And it points up the real need for state support and for infrastructures, especially for finance and law, to facilitate this so that you don't have to be an individual hero to make it happen. You know, there's a lot, you folks are the pioneers for this, but it would be great for the second and third generations to have systems in place to make this more normal and not have to invent everything the first time around. One other comment I just wanted to make was how really ingenious and important it is for you to have had that provision that the co-op can't just sell out at some point, because that's, you know, the temptation is huge for people to say, oh, the real estate market's gone up, let's cash out and make a lot of money. But finding legal and even cultural means within the co-op to prevent the cash out and to make this in perpetuity is really the big achievement. So I congratulate you on engineering that.
It all starts with examples. You need examples.
But you also really need to think about it, because I think we started to think, we had the design first, of course, and then you have that phase done. And then we had a business case, and we'd never built it before. But then you see, oh, in year 31, oh, that's nice. Then the building is gone, and it's paid off. And we get like, whatever, like 400, 500,000 euros. But then we started looking at what do we do with that? And in the provisions for ownership, the municipality, for example, hadn't really thought that through. So they had said, you cannot do anything for profit with this thing. But also they said that you cannot sell it. So legally speaking, there was this situation where, okay, you have a positive cash flow, but we can't really do too much about it. And then you have to, or with it. And then you start thinking, okay, what do I do with it? And of course you come up with, we can make maybe more communities like this on a non-profit basis. But another thing is we thought, you know, you can always bend rules. So it's nice that you have a legal prerequisite that you cannot sell. But we thought if we also make sure that financially it's not so attractive to sell, that really puts a stop on it. So we are trying to now set up a bit of a revolving fund of our own, where if we pay rent, maybe just for the interest to the bank and the maintenance cost, that is like lost. But the rest of the rent should be a loan to the cooperative that should actually be paid back with interest in time. And that means that the people that pay for the first 10 years, actually in 20 or 30 years, they are still getting a lot of debt, while the people that live there in year 31 are maybe able to bend the rules and sell the thing, but then in terms of the debt owed to everyone that lived there before, for them it's the least attractive option. Whereas people that don't live there anymore are immediately removed from the association, so have no decision-making power, but do have a financial right to obtain their debt and their interest. And I think that's really interesting to put the financial and the ownership model next to each other, and then say, how can I really make sure that this thing has no or as little as possible market incentives?
Market value.
Yeah, exactly.
Make very just as well.
Make it very financially unattractive, but a really nice place to live. Yeah, it's really good. And
make something else very attractive. To make something else very attractive, to make the living more attractive.
And to make it regenerative, people that put value in also get value out.
Yeah.
And it cannot be extracted by someone else and then accumulated on the outside, which is really
What I
nice.
also really like is that you need as much creativity and genius to think not-for-profit schemes as you need to think of profit schemes.
Maybe even more.
More, I guess.
It's more difficult. Everyone already figured out the profitable ones.
Yeah, it's really, oh, fuck, we have to think something little.
Don't swear on television.
Oh, sorry.
But Gerard, just a question: the debt that you give to the corporation, will you receive it back when you stop living there?
Not immediately, because you cannot do that in the business case. So you receive. We had a part of like. We can do it maybe with bonds or just with a straight loan. We're still figuring out what is the smartest here. But you'll only be able to start paying back somewhere in year 20-something. So it's more like a long-term
So pension.
Yeah,
You
a
get
little bit,
yeah.
Or at least, a way of getting some of that money back. And the same goes for like a part of the finance we solved with bonds from just a crowd lend, basically, rather than a crowd fund.
Yeah.
And that's also being paid back in 7 and in 15 and in 20 years, depending on the bond. Yeah.
Thank you. One last question before we move on to the other guests, to both of you. How do we systemically scale these ideas up?
Well, I totally believe in the new technology that can help us with that, you know. And I think we should make it super low threshold, get everyone in our country at least to be aware of these new potential and new possibilities.
How?
By just, you know, it's super commercial, but let's go to the commercial TV shows and sponsor those, you know, and say, with Mijn Man is Klusser, for instance, let's put a commercial right in front of that one to show what is actually possible, you know, because
we need to hack that as well.
Yeah. And so it's not the tegenlicht-uitzending, but it's these other networks that you need to really see how you can approach and reach a lot of people for this. And then another thing is that we also need to show municipalities new ways of doing this and give them a guide, you know, just a step-by-step guide. How do I give my land, or how do I force landowners to give land to these new sorts of initiatives? Because I think if a municipality has those, you know, those rules or the steps there, then they will do it. They also like to give something to their citizens.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think, and that's also something we're looking at now that we're approaching the finalization of the building. We are looking like how can we share the lessons learned, make a book, make a website, put basically all the problems that we faced, but also the solutions online. So really outsource that and make that open source. And then I think that solves a lot of the organizational issues, but then you need to sell it also and make people aware, like Tjeerd is saying. And I think the other thing is get a lot of money into this parallel system. And that just requires also making it very easy and reliable for large investors. And I don't see why the pensions funds that are now indirectly investing via commercial developers, they could also invest in cooperative developers, but they need due diligence and they need to rely on the business cases and the plans and the project management. So I think you can make it easy for people to organize, and at the same time, as soon as you do that and you also have a vetting way, then all the money that we need to divest from coal and Shell and everything else of the old economy can pour into this new economy, and then hopefully also to a larger extent stay there. And then the interest rates that they get back can be a little bit lower. We might still want to finance some pensions there, but we need to get some money of the old economy into the new one, and making it easy for both sides is, I think, really important.
Yeah.
I think it's investing in people and not in bricks. You know? That's the difference.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, on that note, thank you so much.
Yeah, guys, really cool.
Tjeerd and Gerard, for being here with us and sharing your perspectives. Thank you so much.
No worries. Thank you for having us.
Small applause again.
Can I invite to the table Pascal Hudson, and then Godelieve Spaas, Natasha Hulst. I'll introduce you guys while you are getting seated. So right next to me, Godelieve Spaas, lecturer New Economy at Avant Hogeschool. You're a researcher. And then we have Pascal Hudson, who is the head, and now I have to pronounce this correctly. You're the head artist, master practice held in common.
Yeah.
And we really like to hear more about what that really means. And then we have Natasha, you're actually David's colleague.
Yeah.
At the Schumacher Center for New Economy.
True.
Yes, you're the director of European Land Commons. Thank you so much for the three of you to be here. Pascal, can we start with you?
Yeah, for sure.
First of all, your title. So what does it mean to be the head of... Now I have to say it correctly again.
Practice held in commons.
Thank you. Practice held in commons.
So it's a master program that I was invited to redesign the master fashion design at Artes.
Mm-hmm.
And as we have been running the program and it has been going, it became apparent that we actually don't educate with a certain discipline in mind. It's much more about how do we relate to the world and to each other, and how can we make this transition from being individuals to a more collective way of being in the world. So that's what we practice, and practice very hard.
What's the response of the students that you work with?
I think it's overwhelming because it's very different than what they're used to in education. But they grow so much, and there's so much confidence built in their own capacities and their connections with other people and their connection with the world. Mm-hmm. So I think they feel very supported by the program. Yeah.
Sounds good.
And at the core of the program, which was a bit of, and I think that links also to what David was speaking about earlier, and I see Kara here, I don't know if she's in, yeah. I decided to put nonviolent communication, we call it compassionate communication, at the core of the curriculum. Mm-hmm. Because I realized I've lived in New York for 13 years, and I was the founder of a worker cooperative there. I was part of the worker cooperative movement. And what I saw is that a lot of things weren't working because people weren't able to communicate in a way that was connecting. So there was a lot of desire to connect and to work in collectivity but the way that our minds were trained to communicate, which is often through judgment, and in schools we are being valued whether we're good enough, and we have to get an A because otherwise we're not going to be successful in society. So a lot of structures in our society actually, and of course that's in service of the market, they promote competition and they promote us feeling not good enough about ourselves because we compare ourselves and those types of things. So with compassionate communication, we learn to communicate in a way that it actually establishes connection and it grows connection. Because the premise of nonviolent communication is that we all share the same needs and that we recognize those needs with each other. So humanity shares similar needs, like we all have a need for love, we have a need for being seen and for being heard, we have a need for meaning. And if you look underneath our actions, then often you find a basic need like that is driving our actions and our words. So how can we be more connected to our own needs and the needs of another person so that we can stay in connection even if our strategies are in conflict? So that we can work towards doing things cooperatively and not always competing for the same place. And especially in fashion education, is still very much the case. Like, it's still a very old-fashioned model of success. So there's this individual that's always celebrated. So how do we move away from this paradigm and move to a paradigm in which we can connect and find joy and well-being in belonging and working collectively?
This might be the hack to competition, Marshall Rosenberg's work, right? Which was,
really important.
I think, groundbreaking in maybe the 70s or something.
Yeah.
Mostly used in therapeutic contexts.
Yeah.
I really enjoy hearing about how you apply it to the educational context.
Yeah.
You set up a program, a linen project.
Yes.
Could you speak a little bit more about that?
Yes, so the linen project, here you see the image by chance.
Yes.
in New York, I was part of a worker cooperative, and we were working with farmers in upstate New York that were working with sheep, that were tending sheep. And our aim was to make the connection between design and also farming. Farming has become really important for me, and our connection to the land. And we worked as a worker cooperative, and we discovered that it was very hard to get flax linen in the United States. Mm-hmm. We ended up getting it in Nova Scotia. And when I came back to the Netherlands, this connection with the farm, and it first being a redesign of a master fashion design, was really important to me. Then I came across Willemien Ipel, who's a co-founder of the Crafts Council here in the Netherlands, and we started a linen project together. And that was really reconnecting our garments and our textiles back to the land, to farming, and to see if we can, and that's what we're working on, to make linen production in the Netherlands viable again. Mm-hmm. And we've taken a lot of steps. And for us, another way of performing the economy is really important, because if it, So one part, and that's what you see here, is the linen stewards, and you were referring to it earlier already, to stewardship. So the linen stewards are stewarding, every year it's about 30 people who are stewarding a piece of land together, and the cultivation of flax, actually. Mm-hmm. And we do everything by hand. And it's in the Linen Project, we try to create as many moments as possible for participation, so that people experience a different connection again in the whole chain of textiles and clothing and the things that they wear. And here it's just a beautiful process. And it was also really about engaging in a process of commoning, in a social process, a social practice of learning how to make decisions together. We use consensus decision making. Mm-hmm. And so that's the process we're in, and in which we are very much evolving as well. And it's also about taking autonomy in a group and in a collective, and where that so the collective is what makes up the individuals in the stewardship and in the collective. So we're very much working with what is alive in people within the collective, and having the stewardship and the Linen Project grow from that. So not from ideas that we preconceive, but more, also very grassroots in that way. Yeah,
the consensus decision-making, yes. What does that exactly mean?
Consensus decision-making is a way of decision-making that's been used in many social kind of activist groups as well. Yeah. And normally we have majority decision-making, so in a democracy, 51% of the votes, that person is going to win the election, let's say. I lived in the United States. No, I know we make coalitions in the Netherlands, but in the United States, it's like that. So what that does is that you have 49% of the people of the group is dissatisfied, wanted to make a different decision. So it's a very tense situation, and it's about being right and being in the majority and those types of things. And consensus decision-making is you talk as long as you need to until you come to a decision that everybody in the group can live with. And that's what I find beautiful about that, is that it often brings very creative solutions, because all of a sudden it's not the habitual, like, are we going to eat brown bread or white bread for lunch? All of a sudden we're eating rice because everybody is kind of more comfortable with that decision. So for me, that's the beauty. And it's really, you need to be active in the group. And that was very important for me as well, this proactive citizenship that we're also promoting very much in the curriculum. So it's not about us telling the participants what to do. We have no outcome expectations at all. It's supporting them in managing their own process. And that's also a very important part, I think, that autonomy that you kind of develop in engaging with people on a really deep level, because if you work a cooperative and your livelihood is dependent on it, it's very important how you make decisions together, because it immediately affects how you're going to live in the next few months. And often it's around money, of course. Yeah. With the linen stewards, it's not so. The beauty of the linen stewards is that there's no money involved, but people are so actively involved because there's so many other values, what we spoke about before as well, that people gain and that they kind of engage with in the stewardship. And for me, that's really beautiful as well. And with Godelieve, we've talked about that a lot. How do you really amplify those other values that are being created in alternative economies that, this is a list of needs that we all want in our lives. This is what we use.
Take a good look at this list of needs. So this is actually what you're communicating when you're applying strategies.
Yes, exactly. I heard you maybe did some nonviolent communication, Shinta.
Yes, yes.
You're familiar with it.
Very familiar with it. Yes, I'm a therapist. Next to being an economist, very helpful these days to heal from collective trauma.
Right?
But anyway, that's for a different live cast. You referred already to your talk with Godelieve about how to apply it in your educational domain. Could you speak a little bit more about how you work, maybe with the Commons, but also just in general, your work on new economy?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm still puzzled by what you are saying, and combining that with what was said before, because I think that non-violent communication helps us to move beyond the transactional conversation in a chain. Yeah. So what we do research for a new economy, and for example, we're investigating to create a cotton cascade that is totally regenerative, and there's many parties involved, and they're just traditional. Old school, they really want to change, but companies. So they're in the mode of transaction. So that means that every step needs to add value. But if you really want to change something, you have to rethink that. Yeah. So that means you need a conversation that is based on trust and relationships, actually to create a common pot with all the investments and all the outcomes, and redivide them accordingly so that everybody can continue to exist. So take it away from the transactional chain, and that's one of the things we research in our group. Beautiful. And that trust and that what you were referring to is really important there. So to my chair, I have a chair at a research chair at Avant University about new economy, and basically. We try to research the economy of tomorrow. And that's not an easy thing, and that's especially not if you're working pure science. Because, there's not many tangible examples. They're coming more and more, so we're studying those examples. We're studying what is emerging. Mm-hmm. We're also studying what is way back in history that we can learn from, or what is happening in totally different cultures that we often call lower than ours, but actually have loads of richness and wisdom that really help us forward to find that new economy.
Such as?
If you talk about deciding by consent, is in the African tribal structure is just the normal way of making decisions. And they're really experienced in that, and they really know how to, because when we start doing it, it takes loads of time. But if you're really into it, it's becoming kind of a habit, and I won't say it's quick, but you move also into a state of relatedness, and not everything needs to be discussed anymore. We are very driven by language and explaining everything and making sure that everything is negotiated and understood. But if you have that circle of trust, there's a lot going on that goes beyond words, that moves to that joint decision. When I joined that kind of groups, I did my PhD in South Africa. At a certain moment, there seemed to be a decision. And I always wondered, what is the decision? I didn't hear anybody say what it was, but it was just the common understanding kind of emerged, and they all knew. So over time, I learned a bit, but anyway. So we can learn a lot of that. And the other thing I bring into my research is the arts, because I think we need imagination and envisioning what could be possible. Yep. So I made kind of this free space where arts, different types of knowledge. It's also, what is very important for me if we really want to change is cognitive justice. Meaning that not science is the one and only domain that we can trust and has the right to say what's right and wrong, or what's effective and what isn't. So we need that cognitive justice, bringing in different types of knowledge production or knowledge creation or understanding, that we kind of, well, it's different, but it's not higher or lower. So, and I think that is really, really important, which is difficult for us. Let's say that.
It's a challenge.
It's a challenge. No, it's also a challenge within me. It's not just a challenge in the group, or it's just a challenge in me to take it, something that I can't understand easily, to take that very seriously and take that into account, and to force myself to really relate to that.
Kees, isn't it wonderful to see how we are taking this multi-sensory approach to new economies emerge?
Yeah.
This is in itself already phenomenal, right? To see how we apply
practice. That's
yeah, but it's also a way of
embodiment, experiencing. It's so fundamental.
Well, we spoke about nonviolent communication. We're speaking about art. We're speaking about sensory approaches to what we are used to approach mentally.
Sensitive, but also intuitive. But
exactly.
Also, kind of by creating something or molding something. It's yeah.
Yeah, that's David, are you listening?
Yes.
Can you respond?
I find that really a deep insight, because once you get out of the transactional relationship, which presumes you're going to be rational, quote, and maximizing your monetary gain, you open up the full spectrum of human behavior and emotions and embodied knowledge. And so, you know, what you're describing is precisely the human richness of the commons and the relationships that you can have, which tend to be militated against in market cultures, because that's merely personal, as opposed to bringing the whole person to the encounter. So I'm really fascinated to hear that description of what Hudson was describing, because I think it's a very important part of commoning.
Yeah.
It's literally commoning knowledge, I think.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's also making sure that nobody owns it. So it's for all of us. And that's not a normal thing to do at universities, because what you want is to claim that this is your knowledge, and you want to make value out of that. You want to sell it even. So, you want to patent it.
Yeah.
That's what...
Profit.
And I think we need to move away from that and really step into that process of commoning. And then things emerge that you could call science or research, or you could call it creation or learning or experimenting. It could be anything.
Or life.
Or life, yeah. So the distinction between research and learning and making and living kind of fades.
Yeah. Well, into as if it were a connected system, a living system.
Yeah, like an ecosystem, something. Yeah, maybe. maybe.
But isn't it wonderful that this is happening?
Sorry, David is saying something.
I was going to say, much traditional science, like physics, have discovered that intentionality and other human attributes are important, and that the purely quantitative, objectified study misses a whole spectrum of things that's going on. And so they're realizing that they're having to make their own ontological shift to understand the real world.
Yeah, we're in the midst of that transformation. It's happening right now, actually,
Natasha.
Yes.
What's your take?
Well, I was just also, absolutely agreeing with everyone and everything that I've heard here tonight. So it's been quite inspirational, really, even just to be around people, because that's really so important as well with commoning. I think some of the conversations I've had with David over the past few years, I've really, he one time mentioned to me, and I've really felt that in myself as well, is that it takes a lot of time actually to think like a commoner, to really, and that's one of David's books as well. It's you really need to, because we've all been raised within this current economy, within this paradigm. So we really, maybe it's kind of like nearly deprogramming yourself to think in this way. And once you do, you start to see so many opportunities, really, for looking at things in a different way. It's kind of a shift, you know, like one of these, do you see the old woman or do you see the young woman? It's once you see it like that, you can't unsee it anymore. And I think that that's what really, I felt that way very much when I started to think about land and ownership as well. And, you know, this kind of links a lot to what Gerard and Tjeerd were saying as well earlier. I spent, I've been working on, what you call sustainability, but very much on the cusp of ecology and economy for the last maybe, 15, nearly 20 years, maybe. And I was first in nature conservation, and then I moved more and more towards agriculture and food and fiber systems and so on. And not until 2018 did it actually dawn on me that the land prices and access to land were such an important part of this. And it was like, I was like, how can I not have thought of that? But it's very much it's very strange. And also this, George Monbiot also says that, is that you don't really see it. Because it's so ingrained and it's such a normal part of our economy. And but I actually came across, it really dawned on me when I came across during the Oogst van Morgen, the Harvest for Tomorrow, a ULab kind of initiative with young farmers were there, and there were a few landless farmers, and I knew of the concept of landless farmers from South America, but I'd never really thought of it as being a problem in Europe. I don't know why, but this is, I mean, now in the last few years, this has really become a big issue, and you see there's a whole movement started with Aardbeer and Land van Ons and Lenteland, and my own organization that I started, Grond van Bestaan. So there's been a whole kind of movement that started about, you know, creating access to land and making it possible for people to see land as commons again, and to also have secure access. And I'd met Susan from the Schumacher Center a few years ago.
Susan from Schumacher Center. Yes, sure.
Susan Witt, of course. I'd met her. She's the director already for 40 years from the Schumacher Center. And I'd met her already a few years previously. And she had told me about, but this was actually around complementary currencies. And she told me about the idea of community land trusts, but I hadn't really paid a lot of attention at the time. This was like in 2016. And when I suddenly had this realization, that's when that this was actually the main thing that was stopping the transition towards a regenerative or sustainable food system. That's when I contacted her and we started talking about community land trusts. She came to Holland and we organized an event around it. And since then, we have been working here in Europe with different organizations and also looking at the way in which we can promote this idea of land as commons through different commons vehicles. And creating these ideas of democratic commons. And one of the proven methods is the community land trust method. So I think that, that this is, we've only just really started, even though you can see it's really taking off. But one of the main barriers, as David also said, and has been said before as well, it's not just about farming, it's also about housing, it's about actually everything that happens on the land. But one of the main barriers at this moment is how do we get this land, how do we free it from this economic system? How do we raise enough money to buy it free, even if it's just for a short period of time, because once we have it, we can pay it off for many years, as long as the interest isn't too high. But how do we get all of this money together? And that's one of the things that David and I have been looking at all of the different examples that are out there, actually, because even though we have Land van Ons and we have AdPeer, it's only just started, but in other countries, for example, our friend Steward Ownership started Terre de Liens in France, and they have a fund now for 100 million euros already that is buying farmland and creating small places for smallholder farmers, agroecological farmers to farm. And they didn't have to wait for the common agricultural policy to change. They just started. So
where does the funding come from?
From French citizens.
Yeah, citizens.
From all of the, they raise, because what you see in France is that one thing is that they have a very low, the land prices are a lot lower. But also the other thing is that I think a lot of French people who live in cities are very much connected to the rural area, maybe more than here. Yeah. And but they created a decentralized model in which they go to different villages and they have specific farms, and then they raise money through people. But a lot of the money is gifts. But there's also, some of it is also similar to Land van Ons and AdPeer, in which that they actually get a very small interest. Yeah.
Yes. Can I ask you something? Oh,
yeah.
Sorry. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Pascal.
Well, all three of us have questions for you.
Okay, well, and David can also answer some.
Yeah, sure.
I also remember that Steward, when I met him and he talked about it, that there is a legal tax possibility in France as well that makes it interesting for people to give money to, or to put a part of their...
Yeah, it's social and solidaire. It's they have this way in which a percentage of companies, money that's from companies, can go, that they can give that tax-free to these kind of social enterprises, actually, and we don't have that here. And also the pension funds and so on. But one of the things that they don't want is, for example, too much money from banks. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So these kind of policy initiatives could very much help with these kind of things. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd like to, because we're talking about how to free the land from the capital or from the capitalist or the market or the speculation. But I think by freeing the land, and I see that happening in many initiatives, we kind of bring in the voice of the land as well. So it's not just keeping on using it as we did and farming it just for the benefit of our food and things we need and our clothing, but it's also about taking care of the land and trying to figure out what the land needs. And I know that David in his work is also bringing in the commons, it's not just about human beings being commoners, it moves beyond that. And I know that in the Linen Project that's explicitly also happening. And I was curious, maybe we could step into that a little bit, because finding the money is maybe easier than listening to the land. I don't know about this.
I think in some ways, and maybe David wants to say something as well, but this, it's absolutely true. I see it that when the financial interests or the financial value becomes less, you create more opportunity for other values to thrive or to flourish. What do you think, David?
Well, I mean, I think this opens up a huge new vista that we just walk right into about, there's a whole movement called the New Animism, which is taking ecological relationships more seriously and situating human beings amidst it all. And so you're right, the land is speaking. Yeah. The land has all these living systems intertwined with each other, which are intertwined with us. And if you read Merlin Sheldrake's Entangled Life book. It's a fantastic description of how profoundly interconnected everything is, including us, using especially the example of mycelium and mushrooms. But it gives a greater sense of how ecosystems have their own aliveness that has to be honored. And we need to listen to that the way a lot of indigenous peoples did and learned about the health of the system and how we can fit into it. So that's just kind of, I mean, I'm not the first to say this stuff, but I think it's in terms of our public understanding as inheritors of the Enlightenment, which presumes that human beings are separate from nature. This is a fantastic invitation to start to rethink how we fit into, quote, nature and how we are nature, and have that be part of this conversation as well.
Yeah, there's this wonderful example that comes to mind, is that het Veerhuis in Varik.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's
the idea to get the earth listed as world inheritance.
Yeah, that's actually, yes, that's true. And also the Veerhuis, the land under the Veerhuis is actually the first. Well, I mean, aside from working together with the Community Land Trust Bijlmer and the guys who work on that, it's actually the first community land trust that we have created in Holland. And the idea is that the land under the Veerhuis has been partly gifted and partly crowdfunded, and is now being gifted into Grond van Bestaan, that we set up as a vehicle, as a vault actually, to make sure that it's never sold again. Yep. And also because we were able to, it was gifted into this commons, the idea is that we want to have the land value on zero. That's one of the things that they really want, that it should have no value. So it's the Maris, who is also who I work together with. She always says the land belongs to everyone, no one, and to itself, let's say. So that's the idea. And yeah, we've had a lot of discussions about this, but also the legal side and the fiscal side of it have been very challenging to get this together. But we've had a lot of help from notaries and fiscal lawyers and so on, who just thought it was an interesting case to look at. But now the land is going to be is going to be gifted. But Henry, of course, Henry Mentink is going to start his wheelbarrow tour.
Yeah, he's doing it.
And he's going to be walking from Varik to Paris with a wheelbarrow filled with earth. And the idea is that he wants to raise awareness, actually, for this topic that we're talking about, and to raise money as well to free the land. So Henry always has such great ideas, and he always does them, and they actually always work out better than you think. So
that's very helpful. Did you have another question, Pascal? Because we need to round up.
I just wanted to... I also feel that through the systems that we grew up in, we also kind of lost our connection to our own creative aliveness and our own being. And I feel to reconnect to that, we automatically also reconnect, I think, to the land and to the voices that are other than ours. So I feel that, for me, that's really important, that we find this aliveness in ourselves again, away from all this conditioning, so to our own natural. But I think you know all about that.
What a suitable ending to the series.
Yeah. Well, I could speak for another 2 hours with this whole group of people.
It's time, eh?
It is time.
Oh no!
But this is really a really suitable conclusion, I think, to the whole series. Yeah. I mean, it's all about reconnecting with ourselves as living beings, part of the bigger living planet. And you
know what really intrigues me about these kinds of dialogues is that it feels like we're getting so close.
Yes.
I don't know to what, but we're getting so close. And it's like humbling. It's touching, I think. Yeah. But also, you just made a movie which is called, which also has the entanglement dimension to it. And I love that you, David, just mentioned that, the new animism, entangled living.
Yes.
The way we approach the emergence of a new economy through entangled thinking and doing and being.
Yes. Yeah, I made a film as part of my inauguration at the University of Applied Science in Rotterdam. And what I basically try to explain in the movie is the essence of my approach on economics, which basically is that we have to stop calling economics and treat it as applied ecology. Because I think our answers lie in ecology, in relational thinking and entangled thinking. Yeah. And,
Yeah.
We've heard it.
We're done for this evening.
We've heard it.
Yes. David, any words from you? Final conclusions?
Oh, I've been tremendously invigorated by the breadth of this conversation, and I want to thank Kees and you for hosting this. And I'm just eager to see what follows from it, because I think just getting more people to engage and get on the same wavelength unleashes the energy that we need.
Yeah.
Free the economy.
So I want to thank our guests for tonight. Tjeerd, Gerard, thank you so much for being here. Natasha, thank you. Pascal, Godelieve, thank you so much. Kees, let's not stop at this, right?
No.
Let's continue.
We'll continue.
Yeah. Thank you so much for Pakhuis de Zwijgen for hosting us. Thank you so much for watching this, either tonight or later on. Really hope you enjoyed this. Let's say goodbye for now.
I liked it.
But let's meet each other again soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.